The dusk settled over the open plains like a soft sigh, gold fading into violet as the last light bled over the horizon. A wagon creaked down the dirt path, its wheels crying against the dry ruts, dust rising behind it like ghosts of all the miles it had traveled. On the wooden seat sat a woman, small and stiff-backed, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Her name was Clara Evans, and she had spent the last 4 days rattling across Kansas and into a land she'd never seen, chasing a promise written in ink, a cowboy's promise. The ranch appeared out of the earth like a mirage. Fences stretched long and straight, catching the evening light, and a windmill spun slow against the sky. Beyond it stood a man, tall and still, his hat shadowing his eyes as he watched her approach. Clara's heart fluttered once, then steadied, as if trying to remind her she still had the right to feel anything at all. The wagon stopped near the fence. The driver helped her down, but her boots barely touched the ground before the driver flicked the reins and the wagon was gone, leaving only the dust and the sound of crickets. She was alone with the man whose name she knew only from letters. "You must be Miss Evans," he said, his voice a quiet rumble that seemed to belong to the land itself. "Yes, sir," she managed, her eyes dropping to the dirt. He stepped closer, the leather of his boots scuffing softly. "Long trip from Kansas." "Yes, sir." Her fingers twisted together, betraying her nerves. "The stage broke a wheel outside Abilene. Took a night to fix. Then you've had a rough go of it." He nodded, as though that simple truth explained everything, and for a moment she thought maybe it did. She looked up at him then, Eli Turner. His shoulders were broad and sun-browned, his face carved by years of work and weather. He wasn't young, not like the boys who used to laugh behind her back. He was a man who'd seen more dust than comfort, whose hands told more stories than his mouth ever would. "I can cook," she blurted suddenly, needing to say something, anything, that might make her worth the trouble. A corner of his mouth lifted, not quite a smile. "I don't doubt it, ma'am. I clean, too. I don't need much, and I can." He raised a hand gently, not to hush her but to steady her. "You don't have to list your uses, Miss Evans. You came all this way. That tells me plenty." Her words faltered. She felt her face warm beneath the brim of her bonnet. I didn't want you thinking you got cheated." Eli studied her for a moment, his eyes narrowing, not in judgment, but in quiet thought. "Cheated? I'm not," she swallowed, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not pretty." The words fell between them like a confession, carried away by the breeze. He was silent for a long while, the kind of silence that stretched but didn't hurt. He looked at her, not quickly, not greedily, but like a man who understood the difference between seeing and staring. Then he said, simply, "That's fine." She blinked, unsure she'd heard him right. He tipped his hat back slightly. "I need honest, not fancy." Clara didn't know what to do with that. For most of her life, honesty had been something she tried to hide, her plainness, her quiet, her lack of sparkle. Yet here he was, saying it like a blessing. Her chest ached, and she turned away before he could see the tears that threatened to come. He gestured toward the house. "Come on inside. You can rest, and we'll talk after supper." Inside, the cabin was small but clean, smelling of cedar and coffee. The light from the setting sun spilled through the single window, dust motes drifting lazily in the air. There were 2 chairs, a sturdy table, a wood stove, and a shelf with a few worn books. It wasn't much, but it was more than she'd ever had that was her own. "I'll get the fire started," she said softly, setting her carpetbag down. Eli nodded, removing his hat and setting it by the door. Wood stacked by the stove. She knelt and struck a match, the flame trembling just like her hands. When the fire caught, she exhaled a shaky breath. It felt like the first real warmth she'd had in days. As she worked, Eli watched her quietly from the doorway, not in judgment, but as if learning her shape, her rhythm. She could feel his gaze, and for the first time, it didn't make her want to shrink away. She found some beans and salt pork in the cupboard, and before long, the air filled with the simple, comforting smell of food. Eli sat at the table, mending a bridle strap, his movements patient and sure. "You do this often?" he asked without looking up. "What's that?" "Cook for strangers." She hesitated, smiling faintly. "Only when they're hungry." That earned a small laugh from him, a low, rough sound that warmed the air. "Fair enough." They ate together when the food was ready. Clara hardly touched her plate, but Eli ate with quiet gratitude, offering no complaint and no pretense. When he finished, he leaned back, wiping his hands on a cloth. "You nervous?" he said, not a question, just a knowing statement. She nodded. "I don't belong in places like this." He frowned slightly. "What kind of place is this?" She gestured faintly toward the wide plains outside. "Big. Open. Alive. I'm just small." He thought for a long moment before speaking. "You ain't small, Miss Evans. You're just new here. Give the land time, it'll teach you how to stand tall." The words wrapped around her like a blanket she hadn't known she needed. For the first time since she left Kansas, she felt something shift inside her chest, something that might have been hope, if she dared call it that. After supper, she washed the dishes while he checked the barn. The wind howled low outside, brushing against the walls like an old friend. She caught her reflection in the window, plain face, tired eyes, a smudge of flour on her cheek. But for once, she didn't flinch from what she saw. When Eli came back, he hung his coat by the door and said, "Long day. You should rest." She nodded, drying her hands on her apron. "I'll make up a bedroll in the corner." "You'll take the bed," he said simply. "I've slept on worse." She wanted to argue, but something in his tone left no room for it. He was not trying to be gallant, only decent. And maybe that was rarer. Before turning in, she looked at him across the small room. "Thank you," she whispered. He met her gaze. "For what?" "For not making me feel like I have to be more than I am." His eyes softened, a small light flickering in them. "You being yourself's plenty enough." The lamp burned low as the night deepened, and Clara lay awake for a long time listening to the wind sweep across the plains. It sounded lonely, but it also sounded like freedom. And for the first time in years, she didn't pray to be pretty. She prayed to be brave. The morning broke soft and gold, stretching its light across the open plains like a quiet promise. Dew clung to the grass, glinting under the first rays of sun, and somewhere in the distance a meadowlark sang, clear and bright. Clara Evans stood on the porch with her sleeves rolled, wringing out a damp cloth from the washbasin. The wind teased loose strands of her hair, lifting them gently against her cheek. The world here felt different, larger, slower, yet somehow more forgiving. It had been 3 days since she'd arrived, and though her hands ached and her back complained from work, something inside her had begun to settle. Eli Turner came from the barn leading a chestnut mare, his hat tipped low in his shirt. Already damp at the collar. The morning light painted him in quiet gold, and Clara watched as he checked the saddle strap, his movements patient and deliberate. He didn't rush anything, not the horses, not the chores, not even the words he spoke. When he finally looked up and caught her watching, he gave her a small, knowing smile that made her heart jump in a way she didn't expect. "Coffee ready," he called out, voice steady and warm. "Yes, sir," she replied, her tone shy but soft. "Hot on the stove." He nodded once and led the mare into the corral, patting its flank before walking toward the house. His boots left clear prints in the damp dirt, and for reasons she couldn't name, Clara memorized every one. When he climbed the steps to the porch, she poured the coffee into tin mugs and handed one to him. Their fingers brushed briefly, and she felt a jolt that wasn't entirely from surprise. "Thank you," he said, lifting the cup. "Best smell in the world, that coffee." "It's nothing fancy," she said quickly, embarrassed. Eli chuckled. "Nothing fancy suits me just fine." They sat side by side on the porch steps, watching the sun climb higher. The silence between them wasn't awkward anymore. It was calm, full of the creaks of the house and the sound of wind pushing through tall grass. "You ever get used to all this space?" she asked after a while, her eyes sweeping across the endless horizon. He thought about it before answering. "You don't get used to it," he said. "You just learn to let it fill you up instead of scare you." She smiled faintly, tracing the rim of her cup with her finger. "Kansas felt small. This place feels like it could swallow me whole." "That's what I thought when I came out here too," he said. "But after a while, you realize the land doesn't swallow you, it just waits for you to stand tall enough to meet it." His words lingered in the air like something sacred. Clara looked down at her hands, rough and red from scrubbing and mending, and thought maybe she could learn to stand a little taller after all. After breakfast, Eli went to mend a fence out near the north pasture, and Clara busied herself with laundry and tending the small garden behind the house. The rhythm of the day soothed her. The sky was so big it made her small worries seem foolish. Every now and then, she'd glance toward the fields, half expecting to see him riding back early. She told herself she didn't care either way, but her heart gave her away. By the time the sun began to dip again, she had supper simmering on the stove, a stew that filled the air with the smell of thyme and onions. The screen door creaked open, and Eli stepped inside, covered in dust and sunlight. "Smells like you've outdone yourself again," he said, setting his hat on the peg. "Just stew," she said modestly. He washed his hands at the basin, glancing at her as he did. "It's the kind of stew a man can come home to," he said. Her cheeks flushed at the simple praise. "You talk like you ain't used to coming home." He dried his hands slowly. "Haven't had much reason to," he admitted. "Used to be just me and the quiet. Sometimes that's worse company than you'd think." They ate together at the small table, the lamplight turning everything golden. Afterward, Eli pushed his bowl aside and said, "You still nervous?" She looked up, startled. "About what?" "About me. About this place." She thought for a moment. "A little," she confessed. "I keep waiting for you to look at me different." He frowned slightly. "Different how?" "Like you finally see me plain," she whispered. "Like you realize I'm not pretty." He was quiet for a long while. The clock on the wall ticked softly between them. Then he leaned forward, elbows resting on the table, eyes steady on hers. "Clara," he said, "I've been seeing you plain since the minute you got here." She tried to look away, but he didn't let her. His gaze wasn't sharp, it was steady, grounding. "You think pretty's what keeps a roof from leaking." He went on quietly. "You think it milks the cows or mends a broken gate. Pretty don't hold up a man's heart when he's had a hard day. Pretty's just paint on wood. It peels in the rain." Her throat tightened, but she didn't speak. "I don't need pretty," he said simply. "I need honest. And I've had more honesty out of you in 3 days than I've had from most folks in years." Something inside her broke open at that. Something tender and fragile she hadn't known was still alive. She blinked fast, her hands trembling. "I don't know what to say to that." "You don't have to say a thing," he replied, his voice soft now. "You just keep being who you are. That's the whole of it." He stood then, taking their empty dishes to the sink like it was the most natural thing in the world, and for a long moment, Clara just watched him, watched the quiet way he moved, the care in every small action. When he turned, she found the courage to speak. "Do you ever get lonely out here?" she asked. He smiled faintly. "Used to. Don't much anymore." Her chest fluttered. "Why not?" "Because now when I walk in that door, someone says, 'Supper's ready,' and the place feels like it's got a heartbeat again." She didn't answer. Her lips trembled with words she didn't know how to speak. He crossed the room then, not fast or bold, but sure. He stopped beside her chair, resting one hand lightly on the table. "Clara," he said, her name rolling slow and warm off his tongue, "you make this place feel like home." The words hit her harder than anything she'd ever been told. All her life, she'd tried to be small, quiet, invisible, but here was a man telling her that her presence filled the space around him like light. She swallowed hard, afraid if she blinked, she'd lose the moment. The lamp flickered once as the wind pressed against the walls. He reached out and brushed a stray curl from her face, rough fingers grazing her skin with a gentleness that made her knees weak. She didn't pull away. "You're shaken," he murmured. "I'm not used to," she began, but couldn't finish. He smiled, a real one this time. "You'll get used to me." The simple confidence in his tone made her laugh softly, the sound trembling but real. He grinned wider at the sound, and in that quiet, golden kitchen, something changed. The distance between them wasn't distance anymore, it was a bridge. When she finally went to bed that night, Clara lay awake for a long while listening to the wind sweep over the roof, the old boards creaking softly like a lullaby. She thought about the man in the next room, the one who didn't flinch from her plainness, the one who saw something worth staying for. For the first time in her life, she didn't dream of being prettier or finer or more desirable. She dreamed of staying. Out on the porch, Eli sat with his hat in his hands, staring at the stars. He'd had more words tonight than he'd spoken in months, and every one of them had felt right. The wind brushed past him, cool and alive, and he smiled into the darkness. "Honest," he murmured. "That's all I ever needed." And inside, in the quiet room that now smelled faintly of soap and lavender, Clara Evans finally believed it.